Hello and welcome to the War Report. Now, I apologize for both the early and the rocky start right now, so I know we're actually a little late, but today we have a very, very interesting show in a good way. So I know when I say that on the show, it usually means, oh, hey, yeah, this is going to be something bad, isn't it? But we have some very nice topics for you today. We have events in Syria regarding the U.S. relationship with the quote-unquote moderate rebels, uh, Israeli action in Syria, which has picked up again after almost a month, 6 weeks to a month of being quiet, and actually the opinions of some Middle Eastern Christians and their views on the two major powers. And then we're going to be moving on to Europe, discussing some events in Italy and how they've become more of a moderator, discuss events around Moldova and Ukraine, especially the Trump and Putin. And then we're going to finish off the show with a nice spicy take on the travel ban. So let's get right into it. So to start, over the past week or so, actually over almost exactly a week, you had the Russian and Syrian governments moving southwest to fight the quote-unquote moderate rebel groups in the southwest on the border of Syria, which, you know, they've been giving aid to them. But over the negotiations about the past month or so between Putin, the Iranians, and the Israelis, Israel agreed to more or less cease aid to these groups and create more of a buffer zone where the Syrians would agree not to go in there if the Israelis agreed to stop striking Iranian targets in Syria, as long as the Iranians would also pull back further away from the Israeli border. So there was a weird peace agreement hammered out during that. Now, I could not be more ecstatic about this because it shows just the shift in direction. Now, a lot of people blackpilled, especially when the Syria strikes first happened, like especially back in the ones in 2017. And then they blackpilled harder last time, a couple months back, actually, were, almost at, 3 months ago, these Syria strikes were and it was just a one-off thing, fortunately, again. But now you have Trump coming out and doing a complete 180 and not even addressing the issue. You've seen the State Department spokeswoman, I can't remember her name, I can't pronounce it either, but she came out briefly last Thursday and condemned the Russian and Syrian quote unquote aggression towards the moderate rebels in Daraa, which is that southwestern province there. But no, over this past week, ever since then, you haven't heard a peep out of it. The U.S. hasn't issued anything. They haven't delivered any more aid. Now, there's been some weird activity on the Jordanian border, but that was actually mostly Jordanian forces. And I just thought that was interesting and shows real shift and shows that Trump actually has still a solid grip on his foreign policy, despite all of the powers that be and the influences, despite our two greatest allies in the region, having their way more often than not. So, what do you think about this?
Well, of course, I've been watching what you were describing already. Assad has been moving further south. He is right now virtually on the border of Israel. One of the towns has been secured. A 4-kilometer radius has been created around it. The former al-Nusra group, al-Sham, I can't remember the name exactly.
They had abandoned HDS.
Yeah, so they had abandoned tanks, armored personnel carriers, rocket launchers. We're talking heavy hardware. The other thing that I heard for the first time this week is there's been these new cells that have grown up, of various towns in Syria. There's 2 now, and they're a public defense force, and their quoted statement is that all foreigners have to leave, but they specifically mention America, France, Italy, anyone from NATO or America has to leave. No attacks have been made, but they have said that they would eventually. I see this as a kind of, I don't think it's a ploy by Assad. I don't know how much Assad has some control, but I don't think he has enough control that he can oversee these spontaneous groups forming. But I think these spontaneous groups forming are a sign of a kind of a new high morale even though Western media isn't reporting, there are refugees that are going back.
Oh, they've been going
Uh,
back since 2016, actually since
that's
2015.
right.
Since the
That's
Russian
right.
intervention and the war turned in Assad's favor, they all
Yeah.
returned to Syrian government-held areas. Believe it or not,
Remember,
the media will never tell you that.
that's right. Remember all this? Remember late 2015, all the spicy takes. Russia is fighting Syria just so it can flood Europe with Syrian refugees.
Yeah,
It's just the level of cynicism is just really something.
yeah, and the pot calling the kettle black in that case. I mean, look at the
Yeah.
actions of the Europeans and the Americans and any other Western power in Syria, quote unquote Western power. They've fallen far from their glory, in my personal opinion. But another interesting story around Syria, I have two more, but this one struck me as particularly interesting. Now, I did mention this in passing, but Israel fired two cruise missiles at Iranian targets near Damascus. Now, this came after a somewhat like a month-long ceasefire, and like I said, it was negotiated by Putin between the Israelis and the Iranians in Jordan, with the Jordanian the Jordanian official running back and forth between the two, which it's just hilarious imagining it. It still cracks me up now, but for a while there, especially like
Yeah.
after the Syria strike, and actually in the lead up to the Syria strike, Israel was just on a
I,
weekly
I
thing
don't
on.
see Israel stopping.
I don't either, but it was interesting because like they would just like barrage have like total firefights. There was that one night where the Israelis and the media tried to paint as the Iranians, even though it was the SAA, had that huge firefight over the Golan Heights, and
Yeah.
that was really the peak of it. And then it died down, and now Israel's picking back up again. But I see them just doing these pinprick strikes, whether they hit strategic Iranian strategic targets. But I again, Israel is doing what Israel does, where it just pinpricks enemies and tries to create a large war that they don't have to fight. But and with the way things have been going, it looks like they're going to have to do more of their own dirty work, which I personally am not complaining. Now the other
Yeah, I would agree. And
now,
in a
now
way, they've become over the decades kind of masters of keeping an issue in the ears of everyone else in the world, especially in America and Europe.
yeah, I don't think any further comment is really required on the whole Israeli situation. But another interesting side story I saw. This isn't like really anything pertinent, but this caught my interest. Now, according to Middle Eastern Christians, where they had they were speaking to them, and they just asked them their opinions on the geopolitical situation, to the point where they said they feel more confident with Russia protecting them than the United States, and they feel that they have better served their interests. And this really harkens back to the Crimean War in a weird way, because you have the Russians standing with the Middle Eastern Christians, as opposed to the West, who are siding with the Islamists and the basically the Caliphate. Because if you recall the Crimean War, basically it was the UK and France siding with the Ottoman Empire over Russia, who was trying to move in Anatolia to protect Christians from abuses. Now, of course, there were other strategic reasons, but again, that was one of the reasons. The French challenged it and said, "Oh no, they're Catholics." The Russians said, "Oh no, they're Orthodox." But point being, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and this is especially true in this case, where you have these Western groups backing these Islamic fundamentalists, while you have the Russians stepping in to protect the Christian population. And I don't know, it just struck me as interesting, even though isn't particularly a big story.
I agree. It is interesting, and there is a genuine filiati, between Russians and other Orthodox or Slavic Orthodox in the Balkans. I remember my first visit to Moscow. I was just hanging out, having tea in the morning in a cafe at Kuznetsky Most, and these two older guys came up to me, like they were probably old enough to be my dads, and within 5 minutes, they apologized that they couldn't help Yugoslavia.
Oh wow!
Right. In other words, there's some things geopolitically that aren't possible because the population isn't going to go with it, or it isn't going to go with it for a very long time. So the feelings there are genuine, and I would say, and of course, governments are more pragmatic than that. They're about extension of their powers, so that might not be there, but they do have to answer for it, and that gives the populace their own kind of mediating power as well. Yeah, I would say that. Especially in the Balkans, it hasn't been forgotten that the West has betrayed them in the past, only to side with Turkey as um, for their own interests. That is, um, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe can be sacrificed because our interests are more important, and there's many populations in Eastern Europe that haven't forgotten that.
And just to clarify to the audience, if I remember correctly, you are both Macedonian and Orthodox.
Yes.
Okay, I just figured I would um, add that in, but yeah, I found that really interesting. Like a really just how it kind of ties in there, and how people really underestimate these historical bonds and the context of faith and culture when they analyze geopolitics. They tend to block all that out, and I I think there's people who do it the other way too, where they're just like, oh, it's all because they have X or Y and Z beliefs, and not because of the geopolitical issue. So I think it's a pretty big issue on both sides of that argument. But yeah, I just, like I said, thought that was
Yeah.
interesting. Now I want to
You
move
could
over.
just a small take. You could ironically say that even when Russia was a communist, a Soviet state, that most Christians felt safer from them than America. Even in the 70s, that would have been true.
Yeah, I mean, like especially like with the in the '70s, where the Soviet Union was really behind the Arab nationalist movements, which were more or less secular, and even are still
Yeah.
today, which I think is actually again another interesting anomaly
Yeah.
compared to the Arab and Western worlds. But uh, speaking of Turkey and the Ottomans, I did want to segue over into the Turkey elections. Now, Erdogan, no surprise, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the new sultan of the Neo-Ottoman Empire, threatening other countries with the Ottoman slap, constantly violating Greek airspace, wanting to incur into Syria. And in fact, he actually just built a wall on the Syrian border with EU money, but that got glossed over. But again, say what you will, I don't love him, hate him. I personally tend to lean towards the latter. He has been reelected the president of Turkey for, I believe, a second term after serving as prime minister for a few terms before that, with 52% of the vote. Now, at first, do you think with the coup attempt, with Erdogan's crackdown on journalists and just crackdown on freedom in general, oh, this election must be fraudulent? But then I analyze deeper. We got to look at it. If he was trying to be fraudulent, he probably would have increased his voter margins by a bit more. He probably would have, even like, a 65, 70% margin. Like, I would start to think it was rigged then. But then, I actually think this election, to an extent, is legitimate. Of course, I believe there was some rigging, but I do believe the Turkish people stand with Erdogan. And I do have to say, if I ever found myself in a situation in which I was a Turkish citizen, who's ethnically Turkish and everything, I probably would be an Erdogan supporter. Now, as much as I cannot stand the man, as much as I think he's bad for both U.S. interests and interests worldwide, he really stands up for the interests of the Turkish nation and the Turkish people. So there's a lot of bases there as to why your average Turkish voter might like him. I was looking at standards of living and like the standings of Turkey before and after he entered politics, and it's actually pretty impressive. I can't remember the exact figures, but standard of living, especially in the rural parts of the country, have gone up more, and he's really struck a balance between both like the conservative religious communities and the urban, more liberal secularized communities. So what you think is weird listening to his rhetoric nowadays, but yeah.
Yeah, Turkey's gone through some profound changes because in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a huge shift of Turks from the east, from rural Turkey, which is very conservative in comparison even to Ankara, but especially to I was going to say Constantinople, I can't help it.
Say it.
But especially in comparison to Istanbul. And they have moved in, and they have also dictated politically where things are going with Turkey. Erdogan himself, he's the dark horse in all of this, but I would say he's on the same level within his range of being a statesman as that of Putin in terms of being able to punch well above their weight, using the resources very skillfully and of their countries, which is substantially less than the U.S., but being able to constantly achieve many goals. And Turkey is a beleaguered country. It has real issues with the Kurds and various Kurdish factions, both within and without. Uh, so it's juggling a lot of things. He's actually done an amazing job, and economically, Turkey's very powerful. Turkey in the Balkans, for instance, and Macedonia and Serbia, as well as Albania. I mean, they're funding all kinds of projects. They have a tremendous amount of soft power. I would say that. I mean, one of the things I heard when I was in Macedonia about a year and a half ago was, sorry, about a year ago was. Uh, even gypsies are like the Roma is asked to convert to Islam in order to gain political leverage against Macedonians or Orthodox Macedonians. So they have a lot of power. They funded certain projects or tried to fund certain projects in Skopje. Yeah, they're not to be underestimated. He's not going to bring the Ottoman Empire back, but he's going to bring Turkey to, I think, in the next 10 years to a level of power we haven't seen in the last 50.
Well, yeah, like I said, the other civilization is terrible, and he has no business being in power. But if, like I said, in an alternate reality where I was Muslim, would be of Erdogan. Now, I saw early episodes of the War Report. Erdogan has played the East and West, which is to his credit, but he's eventually going to overplay his hand. That will be his undoing. I think his arrogance is his undoing and his worst flaw as a leader. But one interesting thing, again, that I thought, just to show the influence of Turkey, not only religion, but just population. You had Turkish expats, Turkish citizens living abroad in the Netherlands and in other celebrating like the Ottoman Empire had just been restored in European countries.
Sorry, you're breaking up, Constantine.
Even like or about back in.
Sorry about that. Constantine will be back. Obviously, there's some kind of a problem going on. I'd be willing to let the Turks keep Asia Minor since it's but Eastern Thrace and Northern Cyprus must return to Greece.
But hey, like I said,
go ahead.
Turks in the Netherlands raiding ardent supporters in Ankara, some other major Turkish city, and I just thought that was insane, just showing the influence just in manpower.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they play the same card that several minorities in the States play. I've heard Erdogan, claim racism in Turkey, in Germany and in Holland, and it's enough to make them buckle. And yet they have these displays of almost near like worship for him by Turkish immigrants in these countries, and they don't care if that looks upsetting or distressful to Westerners. So in a way, there's lots of changes that Europe has to go to be able to, on a moral level, to counter this.
I mean, And Turkey still has this pipe dream of joining the European Union, but I bet by the
Yeah.
time they'd be willing to accept them, the European Union won't even exist. That's my official prediction. You heard it here first on the Warport. If I'm wrong, I will figuratively eat my hat. I don't own any hats, so I can't really commit to this.
I'll
But
eat a real hat.
yeah, eat one of those Russian fur hats. I know all you Eastern Europeans are the same or something, but uh, speaking of the European Union and just moving on to Europe, I know actually this is a bit of a short show today, even though I had a lot of topics. I don't expect this to be like one of our longer episodes because I do have some things I need to take care of, so I need to keep it shorter. But I just wanted to move into Europe real quick before we drag on the Turkey issue too long. So,
No, I'm basically done with. Yeah, go ahead.
so in Italy, Matteo Salvini, he is currently the interior minister and also the leader of Lega Nord, which was the junior party in the coalition that governs the country. He has the upper hand in public opinion, over Giuseppe Conte, who is actually in the office of prime minister. So you could argue that I think this is a bit of a stretch, but you could make some arguments that Salvini is the de facto prime minister. Now, I think he has a lot of influence. I wouldn't credit him that much, but he definitely plays a major role. And I like Salvini. I also like Conte. I think Salvini would be better as prime minister, but so long as he's there influencing the government, so long as he's the quote unquote Steve Bannon of, this Italian government, if I can think of a good comparison,
It is.
I'm good with that. Now, Salvini, along the lines of other Eurosceptic European nationalists, has made his support clear for Assad and saying Assad should control Syria. He's a bulwark against the Sunni Wahhabist plague that is ruining our continent, which, I mean, if we're being honest, he's right. Now, not his exact words, but that's the sentiment of a lot of these European nationalists. That's the sentiment of Salvini. Salvini is also very pro-Russia. He wants to have the EU and other European countries loosen the sanctions, approach a reconciliation towards them, actually try to, solidify relations, view Russia as an ally than an adversary, open Europe to another major power so they're not all just at the whim of the United States or to a lesser extent the, Germans or the British or even the French. So Salvini has wedged himself in to the point where he is on good terms with Putin. He's, driving Italy towards more positive relations with the Russians. He's driving them towards an anti-interventionist position in Syria and presumably the Middle Eastern area of the world at large. However, he is also on very friendly terms with the United States, the Italian government is, as seen at the G7 with the split down the middle where we had the U.S., Japan, and Italy on one side of the room, figuratively, and you had the Germans, French, and Canadians on the other. But yeah, Salvini has really wedged himself in there. He's also behind the proposal to add Russia back to the G8, and yeah, like he's just a very pro-Russia guy, a Russian bot as we do call them nowadays. But I thought that was interesting in relation to the whole Putin-Trump summit, that you have a Western country that's on pretty good terms with both of the major powers and could possibly be a good mediator between the two.
Yeah, and Italy has a precedent for this of siding with Russia. Actually, and so does France, especially in the 50s and 60s. And back then, there was a lot more fear. Of course, some operations, attacks did occur. In Italy, the famous bombing at one of the banks, I believe it was in Milan, and that's, people can read up on it on the Gladio operation. But anyways, I don't want to stray too far off. But Italy has generally had good relations with Russia, historically speaking, and I think he sees a kind of I think he sees a development happening with Austria, and Austria wanting now to have. I think saying alliances is stretching it, but it's definitely interested in having a conversation with the Visegrad group. So there's something definitely developing. I also think Trump's visit to Europe at that, he's signaling that America, and I don't think he's bluffing either, because I think you can only bluff so often before you lose credibility. Trump has mentioned it. He has stuck to it that America is not going to continue to fund um, Europe's militaries, or NATO's, to be more precise, NATO's militaries. And in a way, all these decades long, where the Europeans haven't had to, for instance, say Germany or Sweden, um, one could argue. I mean, I still think those countries would be where they are positionally, but that they would be more strained if they had to increase their spending. I mean, Britain today tweeted out that it's covering 2% of it's keeping its fulfillment of 2% military spending over a 5-year period. But only 5 other countries in NATO have actually done this. So you can see just how much military investment, and I know the neocons are more than happy to sell the weapons, but that's short-sighted because those countries can't. America can't keep paying for it. Those countries can't keep paying for it. So something else has to happen.
Yeah, and especially in relation to the V4, as you were mentioning, it's funny that you mentioned Italy in that, especially in terms I just mentioned them as more of a great moderator. You have the V4 countries with their recent history coming out of the Cold War with the collapse of the Iron Curtain. They have a bitter taste in their mouth about Russia. Now, actually, last time you were on the show, we discussed this, talking about how, yeah, those feelings will probably subside over the next decade or two. But I think, in that, I think Italy will be a big part because Italy is friendly with countries like Austria and Poland and Hungary, while pursuing a friendly relationship with Russia and the United States. So I think even in international terms, the Italians are going to become the world's moderator. They're going to come, to make a comparison. Our of course online audience may appreciate. They're going to become the host of geopolitical blood sports. They're going to be where world leaders take it to duke it out without having the populations kill each other. And this is where disputes are going to be settled, but this is also where disputes are going to be made. So you know what? Open up the Coliseum. Let Putin and Trump and Merkel and Macron just all go at it. Just let them go at each other. And I think it's just fitting that, of course, it's the former home of the gladiators where this is going to happen. And I just see Italy, even after this current government leaves power, just their entire geopolitical situation, they're going to be a moderator between basically all of the world's major and secondary powers. You'll have Chinese officials discussing issues with the Japanese on in Rome, or some resort town in somewhere like Naples or something. You'll have the the Australians meeting with I don't know who Australia's rivals are, and they don't seem like they. You get my point. You'll have rivals.
And it's an extraordinary development. When is the last time? When is the last time that Italy was in this position?
You know what? To revive an old cliche, all roads lead to Rome. yeah. So I actually think
this is very good.
Yeah, and this is a very viable strategy, especially for them, especially with their location, basically, as the heart of Europe, and it's going to be in their geopolitical interest. Nobody's going to go out and anger the Italians because, oh, hey, we just angered the great mediator. What does that say about our country? I bet you the next Korean summit will be in Rome. Joking, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised if something akin to that happened. But yeah, I just think the whole developments around Italy have been interesting because they've really been living up, as a European power lately. They've been assuming the role that people have been expecting them since the fall of Rome. Since nobody expected when Rome fell for the entire Italian peninsula to be balkanized between several dozen city-states. It just kind of happened. Now I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but I just have one other European story which I thought was interesting, at least as an inverse of a event about 4 years ago. So in Moldova, a country that was created basically from World War II and Cold War, the majority of the population are Romanians. Yes, Oliver, the trains will run on time again in Italy, but that's beside the point. But yeah, Moldova, which is in a weird state, they developed somewhat of their own national identity, but then the day they're also still somewhat of an artificial country. They had a mayoral election. Now, keep in mind, this isn't even prime minister, this isn't even parliament, this isn't president, nothing on the national level. They had an election for mayor, and Chisinau, which is their capital city, I hope I pronounced that right, and candidate uh, won against a more pro-Russian candidate. I don't know why the mayors have, weigh in on geopolitics. I guess that's just the way it works, even though I suppose more or less, party affiliation. And I thought it was interesting because the pro-Western candidate won. And there were massive protests the day after. Now, it's funny because a lot of Western media outlets came out immediately and said, "Oh, Russian influence, Russian meddling. They're prompting on these protesters. They're trying to subvert this democratic election." Now, I find this funny because it's on a smaller scale, but it's almost inverse of the Euromaidan in Ukraine in 2014, where you have the pro-Russian government, the people who you would assume would be more pro-Russian, seeing their shared history. There may be some issues there, especially in Western Ukraine. But again, seeing their shared history, all of a sudden decides to, oh, hey, we're pro-Western Europe, we're pro-EU, pro-Merkel, and yeah, this guy who won a, I assume fair election. I know Ukraine does have its problem with corruption, but Yanukovych by no means was just some brutal tyrant. I'm not saying he was, the pinnacle of leadership either, but yeah, just these spontaneous protests against this pro-Russian government that's been here since the end of the Soviet Union. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting inverse, and also shows really the double standard where they're protesters, they're revolutionaries, they're standing up for their country, versus, oh hey, look at these evil populists trying to subvert democracy and become Putin's puppet.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we should keep in mind, and here's the white pill, is that Moldova is not, I mean, it's strategically an important place, but it doesn't have really any pivot. Now, there are American troops there, and they've been there for several years. I understand the strategy that they've used. With this electoral victory in Moldova's capital, that allows them to have a kind of air of legitimacy. So protests are going to happen if they're, your basic bitch Soros funded protests. It's going to be easier for those protests to be held there and for police to back off. So that means more antics. But overall, Moldova doesn't have that much power. I mean, this has been actually a horrible year for globalism and for George Soros. Let's not forget that he's packed his bags out of Hungary. So yeah, the other thing too is I actually have a friend of mine who's Romanian and who visited Moldova. He has part of his family in Moldova as well, and it's a very poor country. So the people there are very pragmatic. They are at their wits' end. They're very cynical about politicians. They consider all of them liars, but sometimes they're just like, they don't look at necessarily the East-West divide the way we do. Like, they understand those points. Like, they get that the West is decadent. Maybe they don't understand how decadent it's become. On the other hand, they are in a desperate situation. So, and for that matter, the EU and various globalist NGOs understand this too. That if you make people weak enough, that they might break, that they might break and take in, whatever politician will, empower the EU or globalism or NATO or what have you. I know when I was visiting Macedonia, like, I photographed some of the protests there, and I spoke with some of the police, who all of them absolutely know that that these were Soros-funded demonstrations. I even had one of the demonstrators. I actually had dinner with her later, who admitted it to me. At that point, she had just quit. But the point I want to make is that countries like Macedonia, Moldova, some of these smaller countries, Montenegro, um, there were efforts to keep the EU and NATO away, and for a long time as well. Um, but there's only so much that they can do, and from what I'm hearing from that region, they feel that the Russians can't help them anymore at this point. Um, so maybe it's capitulation. Maybe this is happening to these, albeit not very important countries, geopolitically speaking. Maybe that's a capitulation. Maybe that's an agreement. Maybe that gives Russia um, more power in Syria. Maybe there's a deal going on, but I don't think those populations will. I don't think the EU or America has enough strength for the next 10, 20 years to transform them, say, into a country. I don't even mean economically. I mean culturally, like the way, say, Slovenia or Czech Republic has changed.
So just on the topic of Moldova, what do you think the chances are of them reaching reunification with Romania? Do you think it'll ever happen?
I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it'll happen because I don't. I think that both of them are too divided on it. I don't see any like strong arguments about them reunifying. Um, I don't think Romania is interested in it,
Well, I
and
mean, it's going to be a burden on the Romanians.
of course, but it's also like Romanians also considered like Moldova part Russian anyways. Uh, Russian is very common in Moldova, and you have a lot of people who speak both languages or have partial Moldovan, Romanian or sorry, Russian uh, relatives background, what have you.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting event, seeing as it was like the inverse of what we usually see in these Eastern European countries. Like, oh, the demonstrators are, pro-Russian and anti-West this time, and the
Yeah,
person elected was, pro-Western. So, and just like I'm not trying to, try being a Russia shill, even though I know it sometimes comes off that way. But just looking at these countries, it's like I these pro-Western sentiments, they just seem to pop up overnight. They seem less
yeah,
genuine, but you get my point. And just
I
on
do.
the
It's very much like
overall,
Armenia a year ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I know the stuff in Armenia still is off and on. That they had some issues a few weeks ago, but go on. What were you going to say about them?
You mean about Armenia?
Yeah,
Oh, well, I mean, they had very similar protests about a year and a half ago in their city. And the Western media also spinned it like, they as if Armenia and Moldova are completely in tune with everything that is emanating out of the BBC, France 24, Deutsche News. Like, as you know, it's always presented that way. Like, the presuppositions of neoliberalism is that everybody inside already is a neoliberal, and that's awakening in them. Like, that's what's so hilarious about our civilization is this universalist presupposition that everybody inside actually is is a liberal,
yep,
and
yep.
that
These are the same people will scoff at Christianity for they just think people just convert, but I'm sure
yeah.
they'll accept this liberalism and democracy. They just need to be pushed. They just need to read some of our philosophy, whatever. But yeah, yeah. I
Look
just
at the protests. They're inner liberalists dying for for like an Amsterdam red light district. Can't you see? And the latest iPhone. I mean,
but
they
yeah,
basically want jobs. They basically want jobs and a stable economy. That's that's generally what they want. They're not really. I mean, I know them. They're not. They're far more traditional people than Western Europeans.
Yeah, they just want to go to work, come home, and then go to church on Sunday. They're what the West was 60 years ago, basically.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
just a segue here. I know we were discussing Ukraine. Some interesting developments around Ukraine, especially with U.S.-Russian relations, that Trump has began to scale back aid to the Ukrainian government, pulling a complete 180 from a few months ago when he sold them 210 anti-tank weapons. Now, I find this particularly interesting because, of course, Trump during the campaign comes out saying we're going to get along with Russia. Ukraine is a European problem. That's for the European, powers to solve. That's for the, them to negotiate with Russia. America has no business in it. He gets elected. He doesn't really touch the issue at first. Then he goes on saying, has Rex Tillerson come out and say, uh, oh, the Russians must return Crimea to Ukraine. And then Trump kind of, bashed on about that for a while. It sells the Ukrainians some weapons and then quiets down about the issue. And
Yeah,
it's interesting because he goes on and off. But then, at the G7, he says, oh, well, Crimea is Russian. We have to accept it, whether we like it or not. And we should really be, working to move towards Russia. And just this recent action, because, words and actions, especially in politics, very, very different thing. He comes out and says,
mhm.
if we need to cut aid to Ukraine, and he actually substantiates what he says to the point where it's not just empty words to appease his non-interventionist base.
Yeah, well, it's obvious. The whole West has caught on the Ukrainian disease known as Putin controls the whole world, and Trump is his puppet. I mean, I understand. I have Ukrainian friends, but it is significant what Trump is doing. This is something that would never have happened under Obama, or if a Bush or a Bushite or some GOP Republican had been elected like Mitt Romney. Not in a million years would have it happened. These are really seismic changes, and I mean it's a lot of what I was thinking even back in 2014 when Maidan was occurring. That why does Ukraine want to join the EU? It's in danger of collapsing, and I was thinking that like in January and February of 2014. But again, they have a different vantage point. They have so I understand where they're coming from.
Well,
And
Ukraine had, as much as the West spurred it on, was at the end of the day an ethnic conflict from the, Western Ukrainians who viewed themselves as more westernized, more the heir to the Ruthenians, versus the Eastern Ukrainians who viewed themselves as Russians.
yeah,
But
yeah, that's right.
just a funny occurrence, I want to say. Trump does continue his fascist reign of terror by cutting aid to literal neo-Nazis.
I know.
But
Yeah. That's Azov Brigade is just destroyed. What are we gonna do?
now, due to time constraints, I'll probably have to cut out the last bit
Sure.
about the travel ban, which is why I put it that at the end, in case I have to cut something out. But just analysis of this, I feel that, of course, the move in Syria, is all Trump gearing up, to have a meeting with Putin, basically a show of goodwill, saying, "Oh, hey, we're going to de-escalate things since I know we've spent the last 25 years with the American boot on the Russian throat." So he's, gradually backing off and saying, "Oh, hey, I respect you as a sovereign state. I respect you as a power." All of that, but I think Trump is doing this now after his success of the North Korean summit. He came in with one of the most isolated world leaders, one of the nastiest dictators of the past. I would say past couple centuries. I think I think a lot of what he does is underplayed, especially by the media. He gets the Mohammed bin Salman treatment for some reason, but he comes in, drags out one of the most isolationist leaders, and then gets him to actually sit down for a cordial meeting. So if he can do that, he has the confidence to feel, I can do that with any world leader. I can do that with a Vladimir Putin or a Xi Jinping or, any other of these, quote unquote, evil tyrants. So I'm not saying, they're the most morally upstanding people, but I'm saying, yeah, they're despotic, they're, autocratic. But if he can get Kim Jong-un to the table, he can definitely get these people at the table. So,
Yeah,
I think the reason... Go on.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. I mean, and then take a look at American-Russian relations since 2008. Um, in the Caucasus, when Russia was at war with Georgia, a lot of people were saying that America was going to step in, and America didn't step in. Uh, Armenia quickly thereafter said that it would join the Eurasian Union. Um, Russia still has a tremendous amount of influence and soft power that radiates around its territories, but it's been that way for centuries. However, look at it from Trump's point of view. Where since 2008 do you see, America putting its foot down and bringing Russia to heel? There isn't one situation. It's just simply not there. So,
I'll tell you something though. I'll tell you something about that. Because as much as America wants to look big and bad for the special interests in the military-industrial complex when it comes to Russia, at the end of the day, even the neocons know that confrontation in a hostile relationship with Russia doesn't serve American interests, and that we're actually squandering a potential partner in many ways. So even
yeah.
they're like timid to go up against that. But just something I wanted to finish off with, finish off the show, especially finish off the topic, was the reaction to this by Trump's opponents. Now, I don't like to delve too much into domestic politics in the show because, that's actually the exact opposite point of the show. But a lot of people were saying, between this and the North Korea summit, how could Trump meet with evil dictators? How can he legitimize their regimes? How can he do blah, blah, blah? Okay, number one, I think the fact that Putin has been in power for almost longer than Joseph Stalin, and the fact that the Kim family has ruled for 3 generations, legitimizes them more than Trump saying, "Oh, hey, let's talk things out." Number two, not every country is the same. Some countries have autocratic styles of leadership, and we have discussed nations we do have, disputes with. Leaders aren't always the most upstanding. And point number three, for those my history buffs out there, which I imagine there's plenty. Do you remember how this country was founded? Do you remember who supported this country's founding? France and Spain, 2 absolute monarchies. So yeah,
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
put that in your pipe and smoke it, and just think about that one.
Yeah, exactly. How many people know that in 1871 that America literally invaded Korea to force it to trade the way the British had with China and Hong Kong?
Wait, I thought they did that with Japan.
Hmm?
I thought
No,
they.
I'm just bringing up like this meme, about what a democracy, what a democratic nation is versus an absolute ruler type, a tyrannical nation is. They're just, I mean, they're so preposterous, right? Um, and I just bring up Korea 1871 to say that there's a precedent for this. Like it's not like it was true until 1991. It's not like it was true, but until 1945, it hasn't been true. So
It was never true. We bought, half our territory from Napoleon Bonaparte himself. We sided with Joseph Stalin in World War II. We still, to this day, shake hands with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and all the oil sheikhs in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And we deal with all kinds of nasty people. And you know what? I think a lot of it isn't in our interest, but I think on principle, the idea, oh, hey, if this leader, maybe he's despotic, maybe he's a tyrant, but he serves American interests, why should we spit in his face and tell him to leave? Why don't we negotiate things? And you know what? Maybe if you care so much about human rights, if we build up a good relationship with these countries, we can use our soft power to change the internal situation. You ever think about that one, neocons? No, they don't, because they just love war. They love the arms sales. They love the profit they make off it. They love the interests that happen when they serve foreign states, particularly two of them in the Middle East, two of our quote-unquote greatest allies. But again, people are becoming outraged over this because Trump has the gall to conduct diplomacy with a foreign leader of a nuclear state, one of the only states that can rival America, for a matter of fact, and trying to paint this as him capitulating to dictators, like we haven't dealt with dictators all through our country's history, even up until even up during our founding, when we collaborated with 2 basically dictatorships to 3. There were some Russian support for the American Revolution when we collaborated with Europe's other absolute monarchies to break away from our absolute monarchy. Which, not saying it was a bad decision, but again, we can't pretend like we it's our goal to spread democracy. We had a Republican system. We made it work in our country. If other countries make it work in their country, that's fantastic. But if not, I don't care what they do until it threatens U.S. interests. And that is my closing rant for the show.
Very well said.
So, do you have any other comments?
No, I don't have much to add to that other than things are accelerating a certain way. The last show, I said that Trump is he's just offering something for Putin in order to square up some deal, but I wouldn't yet think too much of it. But I think now it's serious. I think him pulling support for Ukraine. He's not, of course, taking it all away, but I think he's serious. I think he is, and hopefully that plays out into a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, but I mean, especially if he can just get the handshake photo op with Putin, that'll do great things amongst the people who aren't necessarily too politically involved in the centrist voters. It won't be as significant as the Korean summit, but it'll be another foreign policy victory for Trump and, frankly, the world at this point. When the U.S. and Russia aren't threatening to nuke each other, that's a good day for everyone. So,
yeah.
Again, those are my thoughts for today. Of course, you can find both of us on Twitter. I'll link those below. I'll be doing other videos tomorrow. If you have anything you would like to plug, go ahead. But in that case, this has been the War Report. I've been Constantine, and this, of course, South GSP. If he wants to plug anything real quick,
I am going to be doing a podcast probably August 1st with another fellow Macedonian guy. And we're going to talk about Macedonian politics, current and past. I have a lot of hot takes. I have a lot of hot takes that both sides will get angry about. That's all I'm going to say. But I'll let you know when and if that happens. But it's going to be around August 1st. And also Putin is meeting Trump in Finland on July the 16th. News has it Putin is going to be dressing up as a Sami. I'm kidding. Anyhow, yeah, that's all I have to say.
This has been the War Report, as I said. Tune in next week. I don't know if Rev will be back then. He said he's taking a little bit off. He didn't really tell me too much why. But if not, we'll have our good friend, GSP here. See you guys next time, and goodbye.